Bueno, so today we are with Mikhal Dekel, born in Israel, and who now lives in the States, and wrote that wonderful book, Los Niños de Teherán, the Children of Tehran, which is now being published in Spanish. So first of all, thank you so much for the interview. I kind of identify with you because I was born in Lebanon. I was Iranian, yes, like my nationality was Iranian. And now I'm Mexican. And I'm also a Jew, and I identify with Israel, so we are like a mix of identities.
Correct.
And your book explores one of these identities, or many identities, about your father. Your book, Tehran Children, rescues a little-known chapter of the Holocaust, that of European Jewish children who found refuge in Iran. What surprised you most when discovering, researching, and writing this story?
First of all, thank you for inviting me. And I would be very curious to hear about your family's history as well. You know, everything surprised me about this book because, like you said, it's a little-known chapter of Jewish history and of Holocaust history and of World War II history. This is a book, as I said, about these 1,000, close to 1,000 children of Niños de Teherán. But it's also a book about 250,000 Polish Jews who survived the Holocaust in Central Asia and the Middle East, including Lebanon, some of them. I don't think we tell this story as part of Holocaust history. You don't hear it in Holocaust museums. There are no books about it. My father, for example, was never invited to talk about his experience in schools and so on, like we have other Holocaust refugees. What most surprised me was the scale of the story and how little has been known about it. I had to spend 10 years researching it because I just couldn't find out the basic facts of why people went from point X to point Y and so on.
What was like the difficult point of investigating the whole story?
The Tehran children in general, until very recently, and now actually in the last few years, they've been talking about Tehran children during Holocaust Memorial Days, but all through my childhood and even early in my 20s, this was not considered a Holocaust story. They said, oh, these were the lucky ones who were saved, and they were not in a death camp, so they were not under the Nazi occupation. But part of the reason why there was no information is because it's a very hard story to research, because it takes place in places where it's hard to research. It's very hard to research in Russia. It's very hard to research in Uzbekistan. It's very hard to research, very hard to research in Iran and in Karachi, especially in Russia. In Russia, it was even dangerous. I mean, I had plainclothes policemen would follow me around because the areas that I went to were, this is not Moscow or St. Petersburg. This is like very far into the interior part of Russia. It's almost still Soviet there. And you can't go to the archive and just say, give me this information. They're going to tell you the archive is closed today. They're also not going to tell you no. They're just going to evade you. So you need to find all kinds of ways to research, and Uzbekistan was the same way. Now it's actually better in Uzbekistan because at the time it was worse dictatorship than now. In many ways, this is part of the story is a Soviet story. The Soviets did not document, they did not document the gulags. The Nazis, to our horror, but also documented the killings. They documented a lot of horrible things. It took a while, both in terms of getting people who will talk and getting archives to open.
How did this story about your father, how does it affect you, like the second generation?
I'm not exaggerating to say that I feel like this book changed my life. About feeling and understanding who I am, who my family is, who my people are, even in terms of my relationship to Jewish history. I think it changed my sons. I have a son who is 22. He now knows this whole history. I feel much more rooted and connected to the past. I think one of the tragedies of the genocide that the Jewish people went through is that you got cut off from your own history. And then it's not only first it's a genocide, then it's ideologies, right? You have, in Israel, the ideology was you don't talk about the past because you're starting new. In America, it's the melting pot, so you also don't want to talk about your past. I don't know about Mexico, but it's hard to move on only if people deny your history, right?
What did you discover about your father by writing this book?
Many things, you know, I mean, even small things. Like my father was a very closed up, quiet person, and he was never expressive. And I didn't know that he gave a testimony. For example, when he came to Jerusalem in 1943, he gave a testimony. First of all, the testimony was in Yiddish. I didn't even know he knew Yiddish because I never heard him speak one word of Yiddish my entire life. Second of all, it was just so beautiful. The language was so beautiful and so expressive and so descriptive. And he was just always very laconic, very quiet. He didn't say a lot. So it was almost like another person that I discovered through his writing, through his letters that he was corresponded with his parents in the 1940s. Through stuff that I found out about his family in Poland. Also, you know, I grew up in a very small family in Israel, but I discovered that we had a huge family in Poland. We had 8 generations, and each generation had like 7 kids sometimes. They were all killed, almost all of them were killed, but all of a sudden you realize you belong to something big and you're like just the remnant of something very big. You know, I discovered a side of him that I think was lost or repressed in adulthood.
How has your own relationship with Judaism and Jewish memory changed?
I'm much closer to Jewish history, Jewish memory, and also the Jewish communities around the world. I will say a lot more appreciation also to the Jewish community because I think they were incredible during the war. I think they really came together to try to help whoever they could, and especially these children. I mean, these refugees would not survive without the help of Jewish communities around the world. Financial aid, but also political help. The Jewish community is sort of putting pressure, let's say, on the British or on the Polish government or on the Russian government or on the American government. So I think I feel much more connected through this book than I was previously. I discovered some horrible things that happened, especially in my father's hometown. And I don't...
Like what?
You know, they basically murdered whoever didn't escape, like my father was murdered. It's the first mass murder in the Holocaust. It's in November 1939, long before they have death camps and all of that.
You document how the Jewish community of Mexico was part of the international rescue effort. Let's talk about this episode. How did it happen?
The largest sort of Jewish refugee organization still now is called the Joint Distribution Committee. So their headquarters were in New York, but then they had these offices in Mexico, in Argentina, in Montreal, in London, and so on. That organization follows what is happening with these refugees. I mean, they're following what is happening all over Europe, right? Starting with the war, but they can do very little to the people who are under the Nazi occupation because they can't get to them. They can't get to Warsaw or to Berlin, but they can try to help the people who are in the Soviet Union and then in Iran and so on. Basically trying to help those communities getting medications. There is a huge typhus epidemic. Everywhere where there's a lot of refugees, there is malaria, there is typhus in Central Asia. And people are dying from disease like crazy. So they're trying to get those medications to those areas. There's a lot of black market, and 90% of any refugee aid somebody or other steals. So you have to get the 10% to the right people. The Jewish community in Mexico also contribute to this. I mean, they all basically give money to buy medicines, to buy clothing, to buy things that the refugees need, and then also to pay for the transfer of, let's say, the Tehran children from Tehran to Palestine to Israel, which is quite a difficult passage.
And your father was in Tehran. How things were in that moment in Iran? So they accepted these Jews that nobody wanted.
Iran changes during this period. They accept the Jewish refugees even in the mid-1930s. From the rise of Hitler, 1934, already you have German Jewish refugees. They accept them for pragmatic reasons. They want them to help modernize Iran. There are like 7 categories, professional categories: doctors, engineers, lawyers, musicians. I don't remember 3 or 4 other categories.
Artists, maybe.
Yeah, artists, and they accept them, and they help Iran a lot. I mean, they build bridges, they help build factories, and so on. They help write a constitution. So yes, they accept also these children, although I will say that the children come as part of a group of, they come as Polish citizens. They don't necessarily are identified as Jewish. And even today in Iran, people remember this episode and they say, oh, the Polish refugees. They don't exactly understand that they were Jewish Polish refugees. But yes, I think relatively to other places, they accept them, they treat them relatively well. A lot of incidents of kindness of individuals to the children because they're in very bad physical state, and people buy them candy, buy them fruit, and so on.
There is a Jewish community in Iran.
Yes, the Jewish community in Iran, it's the first time that it's a meeting point, right, between the Ashkenazi Polish Jewish community and the Persian Jewish community. They never met each other, and so they collect also money to help the children, to buy them clothing, and they invite them to Shabbat dinner sometimes. The children come there in August 1942, and in September 1942 it's Yom Kippur. And Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they take them to the synagogue so they can pray according to how they are used to. And there are beautiful testimonies from that day that of being able to. It's the first time that they can practice their religion freely after 3.5, 4 years that they couldn't practice. From that point on, I think that relationship continues, and especially relationship continues between later Israel and Iran. So it's the first connection, and then when Israel is founded, then Israeli politicians and so on make a connection with the Shah, and as I'm sure you know, there is relations between Iran and Israel until 1979. So
yes. Was there a moment when you said, I'm fed up, I'm leaving that book, I don't want to know any more atrocities, any more suffering?
There was no moment that I felt that way, but there was a moment where I felt like I'm just too tired. It's because in some ways the story gets bigger and bigger. I just thought maybe at some point I'm not going to be able to finish, to really get the whole picture. But I never got sick of it. In fact, I was completely obsessed with it. It's kind of all I thought about for 10 years.
You know, sometimes when you write the book, you start feeling what the persons in your book are feeling and discovering things that you didn't think you were going to discover. Did it happen to you?
Yes, I mean, many times when I was in Uzbekistan, in Samarkand, somebody told me there is a woman who was part of the Teheran children, but she didn't continue, she stayed here. Now, she's died since, but when I was there in 2014. I said, what happened? Why didn't you go with the rest of the children? She said, I met a guy, and I liked him, and I didn't have anybody. My mother died, my sisters died, I didn't have anybody, and I was like 15 and he was 17. He asked me to marry him, and I said yes, and I stayed, and he's Uzbek, Muslim. She's living in Samarkand. She was dressed like she was covered, but she didn't hide that she was Jewish. I said to her, how would you characterize your life? And she said, you know, it was a good life. It started out very badly, But it became, okay, I married a good man and I have a good family. So I thought also, I guess, we tend to think about that we are who we are and we can't be anybody else, but it's really not true. We could end up somewhere, and like you said, you could end up Mexican, you could end up Lebanese, and so that was a kind of big point for me. It's a small point, but until then I always thought about my father's journey as going from point A to point B in a way. Then I realized every point of transit is also an end point. For so many people just stayed.
Have you been invited to present your book in Iran?
I'm in touch, many Iranians have been in touch with me. I got some kind of email through intermediary that they want to translate it and publish it in Tehran. But the problem is Iran is not a signatory to any kind of copyright agreement. So they said you have to do it with a good press, otherwise the censor is going to take it. They will take whatever they want out of it. So it's still waiting to be published in Persian. But yes, people know about it. I gave a lot of talks to Iranian communities, also non-Jewish Iranian communities, but also Jewish Iranian communities in America.
In a world where agreements are signed between major powers, what role do diasporic communities still play in protecting vulnerable populations?
I think obviously they play huge roles. First of all, the Joint Distribution Committee still helps a lot of vulnerable populations, also populations of non-Jews. In Ukraine, they do a lot of work.
Now, you born in Israel, you are going from country to country, and sometimes dangerous countries, and with the risk that they know that you are Jewish, no? So how did you do that?
One of the ways I did it is I had a protector. In each country, I was always with somebody who I felt was protecting me. So I never hide my identity, but I also never really traveled completely alone, and I wouldn't travel completely alone. Actually, I was offered to go to Iran because I have an American citizenship. Again, this is before October, so before the war with America. And I thought about it, but also because I'm Israeli and I have an Israeli citizenship, and also because I'm a mother, I said no. I like adventures. I do like adventures, but I was too scared. For example, when I was in Russia, in these far reaches, how much they didn't even know what Auschwitz was. Sometimes they didn't know anything about the Holocaust. We think people know so much, they learn so much. They didn't know. They knew about Stalin, they didn't know so much about Hitler.
Yes, and sometimes they think, what's so special? There are so many killings.
Exactly, yeah, and people will tell me that too. What's so special? My family was deported, your family was deported.
Now, your book also recounts encounters between Jews, Muslims, Christians, and other groups in extreme conditions. What lessons do you think this coexistence offers for the contemporary world?
The lesson, if I put in one sentence, is that under certain conditions, everybody can get along. But it's also very circumstantial. When Christian Poles and Jewish Poles were together in gulags, where they were deported by the Russians, and the Russians were their common enemy, they got along great. They really got along. They spoke Polish, they helped each other, and so on. When they were released from the gulags and they were in Iran, and each one was with their own group and became much more nationalistic, and the Catholics were with Catholics, and they became like that. They became enemies again. At the end of the day, we have to remember this is where most of the Polish Jews survived. So they didn't survive in Ukraine. They didn't survive they survived in Muslim lands, in Uzbekistan, in Turkmenistan, in Kazakhstan, in Iran. So I think that shows something, right? We don't have to be eternal enemies. Unfortunately, there are always nationalists everywhere.
Yes, how many survived?
The Tehran children is about 1,000 children, but overall, if we think about Polish Jews, in Poland before the war, there were 3.5 million Jews. 90% died. The 350,000 out of the 3.5 million were alive in 1945. Of these 350,000, 230 to 250,000 survived in this way in the Soviet Union, mostly in Central Asia, and some of it is in Iran. So it's most Polish Jewish refugees. It's about 250,000 people. It's a lot of people.
How do you think our understanding of the Holocaust changes when we incorporate settings like Central Asia and Iran, and not just what happened in Europe?
I mean, I obviously think that it should be incorporated, and my book makes a case for that. I think we have to expand the definition of what we call the Holocaust. I mean, it's true that not every story of a refugee is a story. If somebody was able to escape somewhere and they were okay, maybe that's not exactly a Holocaust story, but this is a years-long story of suffering and so on.
Your work shows that Jewish history is transnational. What does it mean for you to be Jewish, American, Israeli in a world of migrants?
Jewish history is transnational in the sense that we Jews were in one place, and then they dispersed, and they're still dispersed. And from my experience, Jewish communities sustain themselves no matter where they are, right? I mean, even in a gulag, they sustain themselves in some ways. So to me, a Jewish identity, I'm very attached to Israel. It's where I was born. My family is still there. My mother is still there. My brother is still there. And I go back often. But I also, wherever I've traveled, I found, even here in Mexico, I feel like the community is incredible. Jewish identity, Jewish history, and Jewish religion is beyond place.
And what message would you hope the Jewish community in Mexico or other Spanish-speaking countries will take away from this book?
I mean, I think first of all, it simply teaches about a part of World War II history and Holocaust history that people don't know about, and that's a little bit different what people know. I think it teaches, as I said before, about the resilience of Jewish community and the way that it operated during the war. Oftentimes there is a sense that the Jewish community in the diaspora didn't do enough, right, to save the Jews in Europe. And in some ways, I think this is a story about what they did do, and but what they didn't do. And also, I think it does give a model of how to research and pursue one's own history, because many of us come from these fractured histories, right? That we're just not those people that stayed in the same place for generations upon generations and nothing happened. I mean, a lot of things happened to us, sometimes very tragic, and I think the book shows how to go about.
Because for your father, I think it was very cruel in Israel that they didn't want to know about what happened to these Jews who came from all this tragedy. And even the survivors, they called them savon, I remember. And it was very cruel for your father to try to be like, from now on, another person and whatever happened before.
Yes, don't forget also that there was no, today we talk about post-trauma, right?
Yes.
But even that diagnosis didn't exist in the 1940s. I mean, post-trauma as a kind of psychological diagnosis only exists since the early 1980s for psychologists. So they basically said, okay, you survived, move on, and people carried within them incredible wounds, and this is a history of a lot of people in Israel. Then there was the ideology, and the ideology was we're building something new, and forget about this horrible past of suffering. I used to be very resentful, but I also think there is strength in that. I mean, they didn't want to pass this to the children. They wanted the children to be happy, to play, to be regular. They didn't want us to carry this in us, but we carried it anyway, and now we research it. So I think, yes, Israel was a very cruel country towards Holocaust refugees in the 1940s and 50s, all the way up. I think in the 1990s it started to change, and I think now it's very much changed. Of course, many people died already as survivors, but it's not just Israel. It's really across the world. It was so horrible that people just didn't want to touch this history, and people wanted to rebuild their lives as fast as possible and forget about it, but it came to haunt them in many ways.
If you could just impart one lesson from Tehran children to new generation of Jews, what would it be and why?
It sounds corny, but maybe stick together and try to help your people, I guess, across the world, and see who is in need and so on. And also stay connected to your own history. It doesn't mean you have to become a nationalist, or it doesn't mean that it's even opposite. The more you know about your own history, the more you can connect to other people's history, I believe. Be involved, stay connected, but also and know your past, and don't be afraid of your past.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.